Hi everyone and welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to be reviewing The Ocean at the End of the Lane by Neil Gaiman. Getting into this book, I wasn't really sure what to expect. I had read a few books from Neil Gaiman. Norse mythology was the first one. It's a retelling of Norse mythology story, so if you already know about the mythology, it might be seen as unoriginal, but I really enjoyed it. The second one was Good Omens that Neil Gaiman wrote with Terry Pratchett, and it's very witty and it's good fun. It's really well written. I enjoyed it, but I wasn't like mind blown like a lot of people seem to be. And the third book that I read from Neil Gaiman was Neverwhere, which takes place in London and sort of have magical elements and a sort of whole underworld, which was quite fun. You know, living in London, I could recognize some of the stations. So it was good, but again, I wasn't sort of finding it amazing. And talking about it with one of my friends who is a lot more well-read than I am in terms of fantasy and sci-fi, mentioned that I should absolutely read The Ocean at the End of the Lane. And yeah, I just picked up the book, not knowing what it was about. I looked at the cover and it looked really pretty. And so here we are. I read the book in April and oh my god, it was beautiful and mesmerizing. I absolutely loved it and would highly recommend. So what is it about? It's a low fantasy book, which means it actually takes place in our world, but there are magical elements that are added to the story. We follow the story of a 40-year-old man who is not actually named throughout the whole book, but he's the key protagonist, and he sort of tells the story in the first person. He is at a funeral in the area and goes back to his childhood home. That's when he starts remembering everything that happened to him when he was 7-year-old. So the vast majority of the book happens when he's 7-year-old and he meets with his neighbor Letty Hemstock, who he assumes is about 11-year-old. And surreal things start happening, and basically the protagonist and Letty have to fight a fairly dangerous creature. It's only at the end of the story that we go back to the protagonist being 40 and sort of wrapping up the story quite nicely. And in the book, there's a fairly soft magic system in that there are no clear rules to the magic that is used, there are no clear boundaries, and you don't really know what's possible or what's not possible. You just follow along and sort of accept that's the way it is. And that was brilliant to really create an atmosphere that's super whimsical and mesmerizing. Although we quickly understand that there are some limits to the power that people using magic can have, and so they can't just do everything they would like, you know, they're not all powerful. And so that creates a very nice tension throughout the whole book because we don't really know what's going to happen, whether they are going to manage to get out of the situation that they're in. The plot, as I was mentioning, is relatively simple. There is a dangerous creature that shouldn't be on Earth that surfaces, and it needs to be stopped. And that's what, you know, the 7-year-old and his friend Letty Hemstock are going to be working on. And whilst the plot is relatively simple, it really doesn't affect how good the book is. What matters is the whimsical element, the fact that you're so immersed into the story. And the book is extremely well paced from beginning to end. As I was mentioning, there are tensions, you don't really know what's going to happen, you just keep to want to read and see, you know, how they're going to get out of the situation that they're in. I was honestly surprised that I cared so much for a 7-year-old. That sounds really bad, but I don't typically care for or relate to such a young protagonist. But in this case, it worked really, really well for a few reasons. The first one is that, okay, to start with, he's actually 40. He's just remembering that, you know, when he was 7, some things happened to him. And so in a way, it sort of brings you back to your childhood. It makes you feel a tiny bit nostalgic for a time where everything was a bit easier. And seeing the story through the eye of a 7-year-old really makes it a lot easier for the reader to get into the magical world. He doesn't question what is happening. He doesn't refuse to accept that magic is doable. He's not resistant to it as an adult might be. And that's really key for you as the reader to really feel immersed into the book. And another element that really works well is that because he's 7-year-old, he is very vulnerable. You know, the adults who should be protecting him are not seeing what he's seeing. And because he's so vulnerable, you really are rooting for him. You want to protect him, basically. And you end up really caring for this little boy. And finally, I thought the fact that he's 7-year-old worked really well in his relationship with Letty Hemstock, who, you know, he assumes is about 11, although we don't really know for sure. Because they're so young, it's a very innocent and pure relationship. There's no, you know, unnecessary drama and romance. It's just, you know, pure friendship. The whole book is just beautiful and extremely poetic. The language used is not particularly like flowery or poetic. It's actually quite simple, but it's the images that Neil Gaiman manages to conjure in your mind that are just mind-blowing. I won't give any spoiler, so I will just say that the end for me was a masterpiece. I finished the book feeling extremely moved, but in a way also hopeful and peaceful. It might sound a tiny bit weird, but it's almost as if this was a reminder of all the beauty that there is in the world. So I would highly recommend the book. It's enchanting, it's mesmerizing, it's pure poetry. It's beautiful. If you have read the book, just let me know what you thought in the comments. If you have any other recommendations of other Neil Gaiman's book that I should be reading, also please include those.